Listen up, because what I'm about to tell you will save your life when everyone around you is tearing each other apart over a can of beans. You think your survival plan is solid? You think your group of friends and family will band together and rebuild society? Wrong. Dead wrong. 90% of survival communities will implode within the first 7 days of a collapse, and it won't be radiation or starvation that kills them. It will be math. Cold, brutal, unforgiving mathematics that nobody talks about because they're too busy selling you overpriced freeze-dried meals and tactical gear. Forget the expensive consultants and the doomsday bunkers. What you need is to understand the numbers, the hard science of human behavior under stress, and how to build a group that actually functions when the grid goes dark. Everything I'm about to show you uses nothing but scavenged materials and basic principles of thermodynamics and social physics that have been proven for thousands of years. The first thing you need to understand is Dunbar's number. And this is where most survival fantasies fall apart before they even begin. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar discovered that humans can only maintain stable social relationships with about 150 people maximum. That's not some arbitrary guess. That's neuroscience. Your brain literally cannot process the complex social dynamics of more people than that. But here's the kicker that nobody tells you. Under stress, under genuine survival conditions, that number crashes to about 15 to 20 people maximum. Why? Because trust is an energy expenditure. Your brain uses glucose to process social information, to read facial expressions, to calculate who's trustworthy and who's a threat. When you're starving, when you're sleep deprived, when every shadow could be a raider, your brain goes into conservation mode. It cuts off everyone except the absolute core group. So, when your neighborhood of 200 families thinks they're going to form a mutual aid society, they're already dead. The math doesn't work. The cognitive load is too high. Within days, subgroups will form, factions will emerge, and violence becomes inevitable. What you need instead is a core group of 5 to 7 people maximum for the initial survival phase. 5 to 7 people who share the workload without exceeding your brain's stress capacity. This is basic thermodynamics applied to human systems. Every additional person adds friction, adds heat to the system, until the whole thing reaches critical temperature and explodes. Now let's talk about the resource equation that will doom most groups before they even realize they're in trouble. Take a community of 50 people. Sounds reasonable, right? Wrong. 50 people need a minimum of 100 gallons of water per day just for drinking and basic hygiene. That's 3.78 liters per person, and that's cutting it close. Where are you getting 100 gallons of clean water every single day when the treatment plants are offline? You're not. But everyone assumes someone else has thought about this. This is the diffusion of responsibility, a psychological principle that kills more people than bullets. The bigger your group, the more each individual assumes someone else is handling critical tasks. Nobody takes ownership. Nobody double-checks the math. Then day 3 hits, and you realize you have water for maybe one more day, and suddenly 50 people are turning into a mob fighting over a garden hose. The physics here is simple convection. Heat rises, cold sinks, and in a survival group, panic spreads faster than any fire because human beings are thermal conductors of emotion. One person's fear heats up the next person, and the next, until the whole group reaches boiling point. Small groups prevent this. With 5 people, everyone knows exactly what resources exist, who's responsible for what, and there's no room for assumptions. You can inventory your supplies in under an hour. You can calculate your burn rate instantly. This is heat management through reduced surface area. Fewer people means fewer points of energy loss. Here's another brutal truth that expensive survival courses won't teach you. The caloric math of physical labor will destroy your group faster than any external threat. An average person doing light activity needs about 2,000 calories per day. Start doing actual survival work, chopping wood, hauling water, digging latrines, fortifying positions, and that number jumps to 3,000 to 4,000 calories per day. A group of 20 people doing hard labor needs 60,000 to 80,000 calories per day minimum. That's not 20 cans of soup. That's 200 cans of soup every single day. Where's that coming from? Your 3-month supply of freeze-dried food that cost you $10,000, that'll last your group of 20 people exactly 4.5 days if you're rationing hard. Then what? The math is pitiless. This is where you need to apply the principle of mechanical advantage. And I'm not talking about pulleys. I'm talking about using your brain to reduce the labor requirement. Insulation reduces heat loss through conduction. If you're burning 4,000 calories a day staying warm, you're dead. Scavenge old newspapers, cardboard. Stuff it into the walls of whatever structure you're defending. Every sheet of paper traps a layer of air. And air is one of the best insulators because it's a poor conductor of heat. You've just cut your caloric requirement by 1,000 calories per person per day using literal trash. That's the difference between your group eating for 4 days versus 8 days on the same supplies. This is thermodynamics applied to human survival. Reduce heat loss, reduce energy expenditure, extend your timeline. The next mathematical killer is the watch rotation problem. And this is where groups of 10 or more people start to fracture from sheer exhaustion. You need 24-hour security in a collapse scenario. That's not optional. But how many people do you need to maintain that without everyone dying from sleep deprivation? If you try to do 8-hour shifts with 3 people, those 3 people will be combat ineffective within 72 hours. The human body needs 7 to 9 hours of sleep per 24-hour period minimum, and that's under normal conditions. Under stress, under the adrenaline dump of constant vigilance, you need even more. So realistically, you need 4-hour shifts, which means you need 6 people just for security, and that's assuming nobody gets sick, nobody gets injured, and nobody has a mental breakdown from the stress. Now add in water gathering, food preparation, sanitation, and suddenly your group of 15 people is stretched so thin that everyone is running on 4 hours of sleep and making fatal mistakes. This is where the physics of human endurance meets brutal reality. Your body is a heat engine. It requires fuel and rest to function. Deprive it of either, and efficiency drops exponentially. A person operating on 4 hours of sleep has reaction times equivalent to being legally drunk. They'll miss threats. They'll make bad decisions. They'll shoot a friendly in the dark because their brain is literally shutting down from exhaustion. The solution? Automate your security with scavenged materials. Tin cans on tripwires. Broken glass arranged in patterns that crunch loudly underfoot. These are passive alarm systems that use the principle of acoustic resonance. Sound waves reflect and amplify in enclosed spaces. Hang cans inside a metal bucket, and the noise will wake the dead. You've just reduced your required security personnel from 6 to 2 because you've extended their sensory range through basic physics. 2 people can monitor a perimeter with noise traps while the rest of the group actually sleeps and maintains combat effectiveness. Now let's address the psychological math that nobody wants to talk about. The Nash equilibrium from game theory predicts that in a survival scenario, cooperation only remains stable when the benefit of working together exceeds the benefit of betrayal. The moment resources get scarce enough, and they will get scarce, the math shifts. It becomes more beneficial for an individual to take everything and run than to share with the group. This is the prisoner's dilemma playing out in real time with real bullets. Large groups accelerate this betrayal point because the diffusion of relationships means people don't know each other well enough to have genuine bonds. They're cooperating out of temporary convenience, not loyalty, but in a core group of 5 to 7 people, preferably people who've known each other for years. The social bonds are strong enough to create what economists call repeated game scenarios. You're not just cooperating for today. You're cooperating because you know you'll need each other tomorrow and next week and next year. This creates a stable equilibrium. This is why historical survival communities that lasted were always small extended family units, not large communes. The betrayal threshold is much higher when you're dealing with people you've shared a decade of experiences with versus strangers you met at a prepper meetup 6 months ago. Here's a resource calculation that will blow apart most survival plans. Sanitation. Nobody thinks about this until it's too late. 20 people produce approximately 40 pounds of human waste per day. Where's that going? If you're not managing it properly, you've just contaminated your water source through groundwater seepage, and now everyone has dysentery. Dysentery increases your water requirement by 50% because of fluid loss, which means you need 150 gallons of water per day instead of 100, which you didn't have in the first place.
Now people are dying from dehydration and intestinal failure, and it all started because nobody did the math on poop. This is the principle of entropy. Every system tends toward disorder unless energy is applied to maintain it. A large group requires massive energy expenditure just to prevent chaos. A small group can manage this with a single composting latrine built from scavenged pallets and a trash bag. You dig a hole, line it with plastic to prevent seepage, cover waste with sawdust or shredded paper to absorb moisture and reduce smell. And you've just solved your sanitation crisis using garbage. The sawdust works through absorption, pulling moisture out of waste and reducing the rate of bacterial decomposition that causes odor. This is basic chemistry. Dry environments, slow bacterial growth. You've applied scientific principles, using materials you found in a dumpster. The final mathematical truth that will separate survivors from corpses is the concept of carrying capacity, borrowed from ecology. Every environment has a maximum population it can support based on available resources. Once you exceed that capacity, the system collapses. Not slowly, not gradually, catastrophically. This is what happened to the Donner Party. Too many people, not enough food, and when they hit the carrying capacity limit, they didn't gracefully reduce numbers. They turned to cannibalism and madness. Your suburban neighborhood is the same system. It might support 50 people for a month. It will not support 50 people for a year. The resources aren't there. The farmland isn't there. The skills aren't there. But everyone will stay because humans are terrible at accepting math when it contradicts their emotional need for community. They'll stay until the food runs out, and then the violence starts. The smart survivors, the ones who understand thermodynamics and resource equations, they'll leave early with their small core group. They'll move to a location with a carrying capacity that matches their numbers. A cabin in the woods with a stream and game animals can support 5 people indefinitely if managed correctly. It cannot support 50 people for even a week. This is the brutal calculus of survival. You must match your group size to your environment's carrying capacity, and you must do it before everyone else figures out the math. Here's what this all means. Your survival strategy cannot be based on wishful thinking and bulk purchases from prepper websites. It must be based on cold mathematical reality and the laws of physics. Small groups survive because they match human cognitive limits. They reduce resource consumption. They maintain operational security. They build genuine trust. And they can adapt to their environment's carrying capacity. Everything you need to implement this costs nothing. Trash becomes insulation. Tin cans become alarm systems. Cardboard becomes thermal barriers. This is the real survival skill. Not shooting, not building fires. Understanding the math and the science and applying it with whatever materials you can scavenge. When the collapse comes, and it will come because every complex system eventually fails, the people who survive won't be the ones with the most gear. They'll be the ones who understood that 5 people with a plan beats 50 people with a panic. They'll be the ones who calculated their water needs and their caloric burn rate and their watch rotations before the lights went out. They'll be the ones who recognize that human social structures follow the same laws of thermodynamics as any other system. Add too much mass, generate too much heat, and the whole thing explodes. Keep it small, keep it tight, keep it based on numbers that actually work. That's the difference between being a survivor and being a statistic. Now you know the math. Now you know why 90% of communities will fail in week 1. The question is, will you be in the 10% that makes it, or will you be another cautionary tale about people who didn't run the numbers? Get these principles locked into your brain right now. Subscribe to the Zero Grid because when the system fails, Knowledge is the only currency that matters, and we're the only ones giving you the brutal truth without charging you a fortune for freeze-dried lies. The math doesn't care about your feelings, and neither does the apocalypse. Plan accordingly.